There are people who show up to everything, reply to every message, keep every plan. The kind of people everyone else seems to count on. And then, one day, without warning, they go quiet. Not because something happened, not because they're angry with anyone, not even because they're sad exactly, just quiet. There's a specific feeling behind that silence. Not the desire to die, not depression, not loneliness. Something more specific than any of those. The desire to simply not be findable for a while, to step off the map of other people's expectations. Without explanation, without apology. Millions of people know this feeling. Most of them have never heard it properly described. Here's what nobody talks about. The people who feel this most intensely are almost never who you'd expect. They're not recluses. They're not antisocial. They're often the warmest people in the room, the first to show up, the last to leave, the ones other people lean on. Which is why, when they go quiet, everyone assumes something must be wrong. Depression, avoidance, difficulty, some kind of character flaw that finally showed itself. But psychology tells a different story. Research on social withdrawal consistently distinguishes between two completely different kinds. There's the withdrawal that comes from anxiety or illness, the kind where someone cannot function, cannot engage, cannot reach out. And then there's this other kind, voluntary, self-protective, reflective. The withdrawal of someone who is functioning perfectly well and who simply, at some deep level, needs to become temporarily unreachable. The second kind is far less studied and far more common. Here's what the psychology actually says about why it happens. Picture an ordinary day. Nothing has gone wrong. Nothing catastrophic has happened. Your inbox is full. Your phone has unread messages. You have plans this weekend with people who care about you. You have a life that looks from the outside completely fine. You're sitting somewhere quiet, maybe at the end of a workday, maybe late at night when the house has gone still, and you pick up your phone. There are messages waiting. They're kind messages, nothing urgent, nothing unkind. Just people wanting a piece of you. And you feel it. Not dread exactly, not resentment. Something quieter than either of those. A kind of sourceless refusal. The weight of composing a reply that requires you to perform okayness. The specific exhaustion of being the person everyone assumes is fine. And then a thought arrives without permission. What if I just didn't show up for a while? Not forever, not dramatically, just for a while. Somewhere quiet, where nobody is waiting for anything. If you recognize that thought just now, if some part of you knows exactly what that feels like, then you already understand what this video is about. That thought has a psychology behind it, and it is more coherent than you have been told. Here's where it gets more interesting. The desire to disappear is, in significant part, a response to something historically unprecedented. For the first time in human history, being findable is the default state of existence. Being unreachable, truly, completely unreachable, now requires deliberate, almost countercultural effort. You have to opt out, and opting out requires an explanation. Research on what some psychologists call cognitive availability, the mental readiness to respond, suggests that the mere expectation of response, even before a message arrives, consumes measurable attentional resources. Translation: your brain is doing invisible labor every moment you are theoretically reachable, not just when messages come in, before they arrive. And there's a second layer. Many people who experience the disappearance impulse most intensely are not withdrawing from the relationships themselves. They're withdrawing from the management of how they appear in those relationships. Researchers studying what's sometimes called impression management fatigue have found that sustained self-monitoring, the constant low-level work of curating how you're perceived, correlates directly with withdrawal desire. The self doesn't want to stop caring about the people it loves. It wants to stop being watched, even by people it loves. Psychologists distinguish this from avoidant behavior, which is fear-driven, and from asociality, which is preference-based from birth. This type is different. It's situational, responsive, typically temporary. It is the psyche's version of a circuit breaker, not a malfunction, a protective mechanism. But here's where the mechanism gets even more precise. There is a well-documented psychological phenomenon in which sustained social observation, being seen, being expected, being responded to, gradually erodes the experience of a private self. The more time people spend managing how they are perceived, the less access they have to an unobserved version of themselves. When that private self becomes hard to locate, the psyche registers it as a threat. The desire to disappear is, in part, the psyche's attempt to reclaim that private self by removing the observer. And there's a second mechanism that compounds this. A significant portion of adult social life involves invisible labor, the management of other people's feelings, expectations, and emotional states. The caregivers, the fixers, the dependable ones, the people who hold things together. These people accumulate an emotional debt that ordinary social interaction cannot repay. Not because those interactions aren't loving, but because every interaction, however warm, is also a withdrawal from an already depleted account. Research on ego depletion. The finding that self-regulation draws on a limited resource that diminishes with use provides a framework here. When social performance is a constant form of self-regulation, the depletion is ongoing. The desire to disappear is a recovery signal, not a malfunction. Think about the last time you said you were fine when you weren't. Not because you were lying exactly, but because explaining the truth required more than you had. Notice how often that happens. Notice what that accumulates into. So if this is a recovery signal, why does it feel so much like failure? There's a strange paradox at the core of this psychology. The people who most want to disappear are usually the ones who are hardest to replace. Think about it. The desire to disappear implies withdrawal, disconnection, the self turning inward and away. From the outside, it reads as rejection, not caring, pulling the drawbridge up. And yet research consistently shows that this desire is most common in people with the highest relational investment. People who care deeply, who give generously, who feel the weight of other people's experience acutely. Who are the most connected, the most depended upon, the most present when they are present? The paradox resolves when you understand this. The desire to disappear is not about not caring. It's about having cared continuously without adequate return to self. It's not avoidance. It's the cost of sustained presence, finally demanding to be acknowledged. The most invisible people are often the ones holding the most weight. And here's what that looks like in an actual life. In a world where constant availability is both expected and architecturally enforced, where going quiet requires an explanation, where not responding quickly reads as rudeness, where logging off is somehow a statement, the desire to disappear has no socially acceptable container. There is no recognized way to say, I need to be unreachable for a while, without triggering concern, without causing offense, without someone deciding something must be wrong with you, and so the impulse often goes unexpressed. It accumulates, or it gets expressed in ways that confuse and hurt the very people the person loves most. And now they're managing two exhaustions at once, the one that made them want to disappear, and the guilt of wanting to. Here's what needs to be said clearly. This is not a defense of disappearing without communication. The people in your life deserve honesty. That part matters. But the feeling itself, that pull toward quiet, toward unreachability, toward a version of yourself that nobody is waiting for, that feeling is not a flaw. It is information. The desire to disappear is not a rejection of life. It is a form of fidelity to a self that deserves to exist outside of its usefulness to others. The people who feel it most acutely are often the ones who have given the most, who have been the most present, the most reliable, the most warm, and who are only now quietly asking for something in return. Not recognition, not applause, just space. But here's what makes this particular psychology worth sitting with. There's an image that keeps coming back to this. Someone stepping out of a loud room, not slamming the door, not running, just stepping outside. For a moment, into air that doesn't need anything from them. That is not abandonment. It is the oldest, most human of needs, to be briefly unwatched, to remember what it feels like to exist without an audience, even a loving one. There is nothing wrong with the person who feels this. They are not broken. They are not cold. They are not pulling away from life. They are trying to find their way back to a version of themselves that got quiet in the noise, and they are doing it the only way they know how, by going somewhere the noise can't follow. The desire to disappear isn't the end of something. It's the self, quietly asking to be found again. If this resonated with you, if some part of this felt like finally having a word for something you've been carrying, I genuinely appreciate you subscribing. It helps more than you might think. And if this hit home, you'll probably connect with the video on why the people who need the most space are often the ones who give the most. It's linked right here.